We are working on GMetrix Excel Expert Skills Review 2. Task 1 wants us to go ahead and save this workbook as a template. So let's go ahead and click File, Save As. You'll want to map to your GMetrix folder. And then under Save Type, we want to change this to Excel Template here. And then we'll go ahead and type the name below. Click Save. Task 2 wants us to edit a custom property called Reviewer and have the value of Hideki Tomo. Let's go ahead and click File here at the top. We're going to go ahead and click the Properties drop down here for Advanced Properties. We're going to go to the Custom tab over here. And then what we're going to do is actually just select this one down here so we don't have to type. You could type. And then here's the value, and we would just want to change that from none to Hideki Tomo. Click Modify. Notice it went ahead and changed that value. We'll click OK. And we'll exit the backstage view. Task 3 wants us to go ahead and put a password on this workbook. To do that, we're going to click File here at the top, and we're going to, in the Protect Worksheet, select Encrypt with Password. And we'll go ahead and type the password below. We'll exit the backstage view. Task 4 wants us to protect the Employee Data Worksheet. So we're going to go ahead and click the Employee Data tab here at the bottom. And then at the top, we want to go to the Review tab. The Changes group will select Protect Sheet. And then we're going to go ahead and key in the password here. Task 5 wants us to track all the changes that have been done to this document within the last save. So let's go to the Review tab here at the top. We're in the Changes group. We're going to click the Track Changes drop down and select Highlight Changes. Here we'll go ahead and check this box, Track Changes while editing. And then in the When section, we want to go ahead and change that to Since I last saved. And we'll click OK. We'll click OK. Task 6 wants us to move the worksheets in the Excel X10 workbook into this current workbook. So let's click File here at the top. We'll click Open. And what we want to do is map to our GMetrix Templates folder. Alright, and we'll shrink this screen just a little bit so we can see the sheet tabs at the bottom. There's only one in here we're moving. So we're going to go ahead and right click this tab. We're going to click Move or Copy. And then into Book, we're going to change to the workbook that we started with, which was Excel X12. We'll click OK. Because we didn't copy it, because it was the only worksheet in that workbook, it just went ahead and closed it out when it moved it. Task 7 wants us to use the trace precedence for G18 to figure out what's wrong with this formula. So let's click in that cell. We're going to go to the Formulas tab here at the top. We're going to go ahead and select Trace Precedence. And if you look carefully, you can see that it has excluded G13 here in this formula, just because there's no dot next to that number. Now, you could just go ahead and type in G13 plus to add that in there. Even though it's out of order, it will still work. But it's still going to mark you wrong. What they want you to do is to actually delete out the formula in this cell and just go ahead and use the AutoSum function to add it up. If it doesn't see the sum here, it's going to mark it wrong. So in real life, just adding that cell would have fixed it, but for this we have to use the sum function. Task 8 wants us to configure some of the Excel formulas to have the R1C1 reference style and enable error checking using the color blue. Configure usually means options, so we'll click File, Options. Go ahead and click Formulas. And the working with formulas, we want to click the R1C1 reference style. And then the error checking, we want to go ahead and enable background error checking, and we want to change this color from red to blue. If you're not sure, make sure you hover over the colors. It'll tell you what it's called. Click OK. Task 9 wants us to add watches to cells I4, K4, and M4. So let's go ahead and put our cursor on the first cell, I4, and we're going to go to the Data tab here at the top. My apologies, we're going to go to the Formula tab here at the top. And we're in the Formula Auditing, and what we want to do is click Watch Window. And with that cell selected, we can click Add Watch. It'll verify our reference. We'll click Add. And what we want to do is the same thing for K and for M. Task 10 wants us to enable the formulas referring to empty cells in the error checking rules. That's going to be found in the options, so we'll click File, Options, Formulas, and then under error checking rules, we want to go ahead and click formulas referring to empty cells. We'll check that. We'll click OK. Task 11 wants us to use the SUMIF formula to find out the total amount paid off. What we want to do is go over here to the startup purchases, and then we want to put our cursor here in the total amount paid off. Let's go ahead and use the insert function to find the SUMIF. We'll go ahead and click OK. And our range is going to be paid, and our criteria is going to be yes. What we want Excel to look for is this account paid off, or is this amount paid off, and then we want to put in our sum range, which is this right here. We want it to add that if it says yes. We'll click OK. Task 12 wants us to use the COUNTIF function in G11. So we'll go ahead and put our cursor in G11, and what it wants us to do is to look at these down here to find out how many are greater than 125,000. So with our cursor there in G11, we'll go ahead and click Insert Function, and we'll look for the COUNTIF. With that selected, we'll click OK. Our range is going to be this, down below, and it's anything greater than 125,000. We'll go ahead and click OK. Task 13 wants us to use the COUNTIFs function to find out how many clients owe money. So let's go to the first cell here at the bottom for Smith Auto. That's the first client we'll look at. And we'll go ahead and click Insert Function here after we put our cursor in C23. And here we want to search for COUNTIFs. Make sure it says the S on the end, because we have multiple criteria that we need to look at. And so our criteria range first is the outstanding balances here. And the criteria is we'll key in less than and greater than symbol 0, and we're looking for anything that's not 0 for this. And then our second criteria is the customer itself. So the criteria range 2 will be E4 to E17, and the criteria is simply Smith Auto. So we'll click that cell. You could type in B23, either will work. We'll click OK. And then it put in 1. Now because this is a table, Excel just populated the rest of it with us. Should you have had to key in the remaining cells, you would do all the same thing, except for at the end you would select the next client to fill in the formula. Task 14 wants us to go to the calculations worksheet, and what we're looking for is we're going to put our cursor on F22 because it wants us to use the COUNTIF formula to find out how many employees are in the R&D department. So let's put our cursor here in F22. We'll click Insert Function, and we'll do COUNTIF. With that selected, we'll click OK. And our range is actually going to be on the employee data. And what we'll do for this range is just select the F column here. So F3 to F93 on the employee data tab. And our criteria is R and D. You could have selected that over here. I'm just going to type it in. I'll hit Tab, and we'll click OK. Task 15 wants us to go to the calculations worksheet, and it wants us to use the SUMIF formula in H18 to find out how many sick days are available to the finance department. So with our cursor in that cell, let's go ahead and click Insert Function. We'll type in SUMIF here, and with SUMIF selected, we'll select OK. Our range is going to be in the Employee Data tab, and what we're looking at is F3 to F98. So go ahead and select that range. Our criteria is going to be finance, and so for this, we'll just go ahead and select A18, and it populates that word there. And then our sum range is back on the Employee Data tab, and we're looking for sick days, so we'll go ahead and select that range, G3 to G98. We'll go ahead and click OK. Task 16 wants us to go ahead and put our cursor here in G19, and it wants us to use the Evaluate Formula tool to figure out what's wrong with this function. So let's go ahead and go to the Formulas tab here at the top. We'll click Evaluate Formula, and if we look at it here, it's subtracting the sum of these cells here with our budget. We can click Evaluate through and see that the reason for the negative number is the one's bigger than the other. If you look at it, you're under budget by, you realize that B4 is our budget and it's subtracting the expenses. What we need to do is just flip this. And so in order to do that, we'll go ahead and delete the formula. We'll do the equal sign. We'll select B4 because that's our total budget, and we're going to go ahead and subtract by B18, which is the total of our expenses. We'll go ahead and click enter, and we're under budget by $371.64. Task 17 wants us to use the VLOOKUP function in N39 to find the bonus for Matthew. So let's put our cursor there in that cell. We'll click insert function. We'll type in VLOOKUP. With that selected, we'll click OK. Now our lookup value is N35 here, which puts the Matthew full name here in the table, or in the lookup value. And then for our table array, it's going to be in the employee data tab. Now GMetrix can be kind of finicky. It wants you to select from A3 through this entire table, not A2, which I would have probably selected. So A3 to H98 on the employee data tab. Now before we click column index number, I would encourage you to look up here at the top, because what we're looking for is bonus, which is the fourth column. Because when we click here, it jumps back here. If you click the employee, it's going to start to fill out that sheet name, and you'll have to delete it out. That's a lot said, but really what we want is the number 4 here. And then we want to type in false in the range lookup because we want an exact match. We'll go ahead and click OK. Task 18 wants us to add a linear forecast trend line to the number of employees by year chart. So let's go ahead and select this chart up here, which is the one it wants to add the trend line to. We'll click the plus button over here. You could also click the design tab here at the top with that chart selected, but we'll click the plus and then we'll click the arrow for trend line. Now notice there's two linears. You have linear and then you have linear forecast, and the second option is what we want. So we'll go ahead and select that, and we'll click off the chart, and it added that for us. Task 19 wants us to fix one of the charts called salary distribution. So let's go ahead and select this chart here, and it just looks a little bit odd here. The problem with this chart is simply that it doesn't select all of the employees, and you can see that by clicking select data, and it ends on D21. It shows us what the data is, but really what we want is all of the bonus. So we'll select the entire range, which goes to D98. We'll click OK. Task 20 wants us to go to the yearly charts worksheet, and it wants us to change the January chart to have the style of 4. So with that chart selected, we'll click design here at the top, and in the chart styles group, we're going to look for style 4, which is this one. So we'll go ahead and click it. And then it wants us to save this, so I'll right click as a template into our GMetrix templates folder. So map to that folder, and we'll call it time card chart. Click save. Task 21 wants us to use the goal seeking tool to find out with a budget of $15,000 how many people could go on the business trip. So let's go ahead and put our cursor here in B23. We want to go to the formula tab here at the top. My apologies, the data here, data tab at the top. And in the forecast group, we want to click the what if analysis, and we're going to use the goal seek. Now, our set cell is B23, and that's why we put our cursor there first. And what we want to do is the value of 15,000, and by changing B22, so we'll select that cell, we'll click OK. It tells us that 8 people can go. We can click OK. Task 22 wants us to create a scenario called less, and the scenario is if we cut the entertainment budget in half. So let's go to the data tab here at the top. In the forecast group, we're going to click the what if analysis drop down, select scenario manager. From here, we'll click add. We'll type in the name less, and it's by changing C15 because that's the entertainment budget here. So we'll select that cell, and then we're going to click OK. And then in this cell, we want to go from 130 to half, which is 65. We'll click OK. And then what we want to do is actually click create a scenario summary for this. So we'll click summary here, and we'll click OK. Task 23 wants us to go ahead and insert some slicers on the employee data pivot chart tab. So let's click here, and then over here up at the top, we want to click, because the pivot table is already selected, we'll click Analyze, and then the filter group, we'll click Insert Slicer, and then we'll select Full Name, Salary, and Department, and we'll click OK. Task 24 wants us to go ahead and insert a pivot table based upon the information in this table. And so let's go ahead and select the range B3 to J17. And then once we select that range, we'll go to the Insert tab here at the top. We'll click Pivot Table. And from here, we'll go ahead and click Existing Worksheet. And in here, location, we'll go ahead and type in E22. It's weird how they phrase it, and if you're quickly reading, you'll select E23 because it says beneath, but it wants the location to be E22. We'll click OK. And then from here, we just want to go ahead and select Invoice and Outstanding Data, the checkbox. Could also just click and drag them down, and we'll click Next. Task 25 wants us to edit a pivot chart, and it's found on the Employee Data Pivot Chart worksheet. So let's go ahead and select that tab. Our pivot chart's down here, and it wants us to place the full name, which I'll click and drag to the Accesses categories. And then it wants the performance scores to be in the values. So let's go ahead and select performance scores, and I'm just going to drag to the values section. Task 26 wants us to create a pivot table based upon a named range. So to select that range in the name box, I'm just going to click this drop down and select Invoices, which is our named range. And then we're going to go to Insert a Pivot Chart. So let's go ahead and Pivot Table, my apologies. We'll click Insert Pivot Table, and it tells us a new worksheet. And it's real clear at the end of this, just make sure that we do not check that. So make sure that's not checked. We'll click OK. And then here, what we want to do is customer name. We'll make that our row. And then the amount, we'll scroll down, and we'll move that over here. Now, what it does not want the count. It wants the sum. So what we want to do is click this little drop-down arrow, select Value Field Settings, and we want to select Sum, and you'll see the numbers change over here. Task 25 wants us to go ahead and create a macro to change the column widths to 25. So let's go ahead and click View here at the top. In the Macros group, we'll click the Macros drop-down, and we'll select Record Macro. It tells us that it wants the macro name to be called Column Widths, one word. Capital C, capital W. It doesn't tell us to change any of the shortcuts. It does make sure to say to save it in this workbook. So with that selected, we'll click OK. Now it's recording us. It doesn't do anything like Word does as far as showing you that it's recording, but you can see down here in the status bar that it is recording. So be careful what you click. We'll click Home here at the top, because what we want to do is change column widths to be 25. So we're in the cells format column width. We'll type in 25 and click OK. And then our macro is still recording, so we want to go to the View tab here at the top. We'll click the Macros drop down and click Stop Recording. And it tells us that it wants all of the columns to be 25. So let's click this space between 1 and A. We're on the View tab, Macros drop down. We'll click View Macros, and we'll select Run after we click Column Width. They're trying to get you with the that not being the first one. So select Column Width, then click Run. Task 28 wants us to assign a macro to this button. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and right-click this button, and we'll click Assign Macro. And what we want is to change color. So we'll click that, and we'll click OK. We'll click off the button because it wants us to run the macro as well. So we'll go ahead and select that now. Notice the change at the top. Task 29 wants us to go ahead and create a spin button in F8 and F9. So we want to go to the Developer tab. If you do not have the Developer tab, make sure you right-click up here to select Customize the ribbon and check the Developer box and click OK. That'll give you the Developer tab here at the top. We're going to select Developer again. We're in the Controls group, Insert drop-down, and what we want is the Spin button form control. And it tells us that it wants it in F8 to F9. So we'll go ahead and draw that. Now it wants us to add some things to it. So let's right-click the button. We're going to go ahead and format the control. And our minimum value, say 1 to 100. The change is going to be by 1. And our cell link is going to be F7. And we'll click OK. Task 30 wants us to edit the form control on the dashboard worksheet. So it's right here. It's right above the employee information. And what we want to do is actually just right-click that form control, and we'll click Format the Control. And our input range is going to be on the Employee Data tab, and it's all of these names here. So from A3 to A98. And our cell link is going to be P34 per the instructions. Click the drop down and we'll click OK.